Right now, in the 1920s, John D. Rockefeller gave $1 million to the University of Chicago to fund an archaeological dig in Palestine. Right, and the location that the University of Chicago wanted to dig, or they chose, was here at Megiddo. Right, and $1 million in the 1920s is a lot of money. Right, and so they think, oh, we have all this money, we have all these funds. We're going to dig the entire tell, all the way down to the bottom, to bedrock. Right, and then they get here, and they see the size of this tell, and they're like, forget that. We're not going to do that. We're going to be here. Our grandkids won't finish that. Right, and so what they decide to do, right, is to basically choose one section of the tell and cut all the way down to the bedrock, which is kind of rare, actually. You don't always want to go down to the bedrock, right, because you have to understand archaeology is a science of destruction, right? If you want to get to something at the Greek level, you think that there's something cool from the Greek level, you have to just, say you find an amazing Roman era building, you have to destroy that building in order to get to the Greek level below it. So you don't necessarily always want to go down to the bedrock. But here in this particular case, they decided to do that. And the location that they kind of chose at random almost happened to be the sacred area, right, of the Tell of Megiddo. For thousands of years, 7,000 years, right, this location during the Canaanite and pre-Canaanite even, right, time period, right, people were worshiping in these very large megaron temples that we can see the foundations of right over here, and sometimes, right, we can see the outlines, by the way, right, as well. And sometimes these temples, they were built next to each other. There wasn't like one temple at one time period. At some points, there were two temples, right? And also, keeping with the theme of Caesarea, right, that holy sites stay holy, right? For thousands of years, they kept building, right, on top of one another, right? And we can see this very large altar, right, the 7-meter diameter stone altar with the steps leading up to it, where they would sacrifice, right, animals and maybe humans. Well, it depends on what time period we're talking about. We didn't find any human bones. We found a lot of animal bones, right? But they just happened to choose an area where that was very significant and important, right, for the people living here in Megiddo. Anybody read James Michener's book, The Source? But so that dig is kind of based off of Megiddo, right? It was inspired by the dig here at Megiddo. It's a great book, by the way. You really should read it. You need to get through the first 3 chapters. It's very tedious, but once you get through those first 3 chapters, you read it like, you just go through it like butter. It's in my top 10 all It's time. An amazing book. It really is. It talks about the history of the land of Israel from caveman times all the way up into modern times, right? And it kind of follows like one family, right, whose genes were passed on for thousands of years, right? And they changed, right? The family changes with the culture, right? At one point they're Canaanites, at one point they're Israelites, at one point they're Arabs, at one point they're Turks, right? What we see in front of us is the Plains of Megiddo, right? And the Jezreel Valley. Now, in front of us, over here on the left, this small little mountain range, which looks like a city sort of wrapped around it. Those are the mountains of Nazareth, right? And those buildings, not all of them, because some of them are from the Arab villages around it, but those buildings in the center are the city of Nazareth, right? So that's the city, that's the town that Jesus grew up in. To the right, we see this lone mountain standing by itself. That's Mount Tabor, right? Or Mount Tabor. And the mountain to the right, behind the city of Afula, that's what it's called Givat HaMoreh. That's connected to the story of Gideon, right? And his 300, right? But we'll talk about that story tomorrow. What the story I do want to talk about is connected to Mount Tabor, right? This is one of those instances where the land is going to dictate how things play out in the Bible. In the book of Judges, right? The Philistines are causing problems for the Israelites. And God sends Debra, right, a prophetess, to help, right? And she tells Barak, right, a general, right, to deal with this. Now Barak, right, being the good man that he is, he knows when he needs a good woman by his side, and he says, Deborah, I can't do this without you. You need to be with me. And so Deborah says, fine, take the Israelites and go to Mount Tabor, right, and settle, right, and put themselves up, right, camp there. The Philistines, in the meantime, they're coming, right, with their chariots here in the valley, Now, and chariots, by the way, are like the B-2 bombers of the ancient world. You have a chariot in your military arsenal, you have a significant advantage over your enemy that doesn't, right? Huge advantage. All right? Now, the fact that she chooses the Mount of Earth for a strategic reason, right? It's in an area where there's a bottleneck. You have the mountains of Nazareth on the left. You have the mountains of Givat HaMoreh, or the mountain of Givat HaMoreh on the right, right? And so the Philistines, right, their chariot battalions and formations, they can't necessarily maneuver the way that they would like to, right? Because they have less room to do that. Right now, we have friends in high places, right? So God starts making it rain, right? And starts to flood the Kishon stream, right? That flows through the middle of the valley. That Kishon stream is going to overflow eventually and starts turning the ground into mud. Now, chariots, as you can imagine, don't do very well in the mud, right? And so now that the chariots are stuck, the Israelites come down from the mountain, led by Barak and Deborah, and they start killing and slaying, right, the Philistines as they try to run away. Now, the Philistine general, Sisera, he does get away, right? He sees what's going on, and he runs, right? And he runs to the tent of a woman named Yael, or Jael, sometimes it's pronounced in English, right? And she feels so sorry for him. You've had a really rough day, right? Things aren't going for you, right? Come inside, have a warm glass of milk, right? Relax. In the morning, I promise you everything will be better. All right, so Sisera, he comes to the tent, he drinks the warm glass of milk, which by the way makes him sleepy and tired, yes? And he goes to sleep. Now Yael, who knows who this guy is, right? She doesn't like him. She takes a wooden stake, and puts it right through his head as he's sleeping, right? Last thing to go through his mind. Now she goes, right there, wait for laughter. Yes, there we go. Thank you very much. Right, then she goes to Yael and Deborah and Barak. She's like, hey guys, guess who I have in my tent? I heard you guys are looking for somebody. He just happens to be, right, nailed down to my tent. Right? So here, the land is dictating, right, why, right, this battle plays out the way it does and why they chose this place. Right now, there are going to be many, many, many battles, right, in the history of the land of Israel here in this valley. Right, from the time of Thutmose III, all the way to the time of General Allenby in the First World War. This is one of the very last places where you have a cavalry battle in modern warfare. And it's for this reason that in Revelations, it mentions Megiddo. Now, we're going to chapter 16. Right, in this chapter, you have the angels pouring out bowls, right? And every time an angel pours out a bowl, something bad happens, right? So we're at the sixth angel. Right, verse 12, the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up, to prepare the way for the kings from the east. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they are demonic spirits performing signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays away, keeping his garments on, that he may not go about naked and be seen exposed. And they assembled them at the place in Hebrew, that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Right, so here we are at Armageddon. Armageddon is sort of a Greek transliteration of the Aramaic Har Megiddo. Har means mountain, and Megiddo is Megiddo. So Har Megiddo becomes Armageddon. Right, the final battle, right, end of days takes place here. Why? Because this is the best place in the land of Israel, right, where armies coming from the south, armies coming from the north, right, go through the mountainous terrain and desert, and then they reach this area, and boom, they have this beautiful valley. They can deploy their chariots, their infantry, their tanks, right, their artillery pieces, right, meeting and facing off, right, in the middle of the valley, right? And this valley goes all the way over there. We can actually see the beginning of the ridgeline, right over there, sort of just beyond the haze, right? And it continues south and east all the direction. You can actually see the mountains of Jordan over there through the haze as well, right? So this is where, right, armies coming from different locations, right? The armies coming from the coast, right, sandwiched in between the mountains of Samaria and the coast, like we were. The armies coming from the north through the Golan Heights, the Galilean mountains, and they reach past Mount Tabor, and boom, right? They can now deploy, and now you can understand, right, why the battle between good and evil, right, in the land of Israel would take place here. Right? The land itself dictates this. According to the Byzantine and Catholic Church, Mount Tabor is associated with the miracle of the Transfiguration, right? Where Jesus ascends up into heaven, he meets with Elijah and Moses, right? And when he's coming down, right, Peter, John, and James, right? They see him and they make the three, right, booths. By the way, the booths, right, are the sukkah, the tabernacles, right, that Jews make also on the Feast of Tabernacles in September, October, right? So that is, according to them, right, where this miracle takes place. Now, in the Bible, it doesn't say Mount Tabor. It says after 3 days, he goes up a high mountain, all right, and the Byzantines chose that mountain. The Byzantines sometimes choose, I'll talk about it, but they have different ways of determining where miracles and events take place. Some of it, they ask the local Judeo-Christian. Some of it, if they're completely arbitrary. And sometimes it's like a geographical anomaly will determine, yes, this is where the miracle takes place. But we'll talk about that as time goes on. We have a little bit of time, so I'll tell you one more story. Over here we see buildings, right, amongst the trees, white buildings. Right, that's a prison. Right, but that's not a normal prison for like thieves and murderers. It's a security prison for terrorists. Right now, they wanted to either build a new wing or upgrade something with the prison that's there. So they need to do construction. But in Israel, before you do any kind of building, right? You're building a new condo, apartment, house, building a road, right? You have to do an archaeological survey. So they asked the inmates there if they would like to, break the mundane life of being a prisoner and help, right, doing the dig, like sifting, going through. They're supervised, of course, by Israel Antiquities people, right? But you have a number, right? These are Islamic Jihad, Hamas, right? Islamic terrorist people from Yasser Arafat's Fatah, right? And so, yes, okay, why not? We'll do it. And so they do start digging, and they found a building from the 4th century, and they start finding mosaics, and they start finding paraphernalia, right? And it's looking like this building is a church, right? And it's from an early time period, 4th century, right? There weren't that many churches, if any at all, in early 4th century, because it was illegal to be a Christian. So you're not going to build a church and then show up on Sunday, because you're going to have Roman soldiers waiting in the front to kill and arrest anybody that shows up. So they would meet in like house churches, right, in secret. Right, but then when it becomes legal to be a Christian, well, we don't need to meet in house churches anymore. Let's build an actual building, right, for the purpose of prayer. And so that's what they believe that this is, right? Could be quite possibly the earliest Christian church in the world, maybe in the land of Israel. So I always like to joke that only in the Jewish state will Islamic terrorists find the world's oldest Christian church. Now, because of that find, right, it's my understanding that they're going to move the prison and turn the site into a tourist location. But, who knows when or if that will happen. Israel takes 5-year plan, takes 10 years. All right, let's head over to the water system. These stables right here, this building, right, are stables that are dated to the kingdom of Israel, right, during the Omri Dynasty, which is generally when you have things from the Omri Dynasty that are being built up in very well thought out and planned. It's generally associated with King Ahab, right? In the Bible, he's not a very good character. He's not a very good moral character. But as far as archaeologists are concerned, he's a very good builder, very good administrator, right? You see a lot of things happening during his reign, right? And this is a stable attributed to his time period. And it's interesting because in Iraq, either Iraq or Syria, I forget exactly where this is, but in the 1800s, they found a cuneiform inscription, an Assyrian cuneiform inscription talking about a battle that took place between the Assyrians and this alliance of kings, right? The Assyrian Empire, right, which is based out of like what is today northern Iraq, was the largest empire the world had ever known at that point in time. It was huge, right? And the reason why they could conquer so many people is because they were very cruel and sadistic. They also had amazing military technology, which I'll talk about later on in our tour. Okay, but they were very cruel people, right? It was like the evil empire of its day. And whenever a king dies, usually this is a time for all these subjugated peoples to rise up against them. And it's usually an alliance. It's never one versus the Assyrians. It's a stupid thing to do. You need many allies to fight the Assyrian army. And so you had this alliance of kings, right? And it lists the names of the kings and the countries and how much how much military troops they brought, right? And in this, it talks about the kingdom of Israel, right, led by King Ahab, who brings 2,000 horses, right, or something like 200 chariots, right, and 400 horse, right, which is more than any of the other members of this alliance, more horses and cavalry than anybody else that went to war against the Assyrians in this battle, right? And the Assyrians actually lose this battle, right? They are defeated by this alliance, which you could question the numbers, right? Because if the Assyrians lost, they don't want to say they lost to 5 people. No, we didn't lose to 5. We lost to 5,000 people, right? Because if you lose, you got to justify your loss. So the numbers might be inflated, but at the very least, it tells us that King Ahab had more chariots than anybody else and more horses, right? And that stable is going to be where he puts them. This is a silo. It's a grain silo, right? Dated to the Assyrian time period, right? The Assyrians come here, right? And they subjugate both kingdoms of Judah and Israel, right? And to keep the Assyrians from destroying their cities and killing them, you have to pay a fealty, right? To pay a tax. We call it taxes today, right? Now, the kingdom of Israel decided they don't want to pay their taxes, right, to the Assyrian Empire, right? And what happens when you don't pay your taxes? The man comes and gets you, right? And it's exactly what happens. The Assyrians, they come, right, in 732, actually, not 722, 732, Tilgath-Pileser comes, right, and destroys the kingdom of Israel, right, and subjugates them harshly. 10 years later, the kingdom of Israel does it again, right? And the Assyrians are tired of it. It's like, we don't want to come back and keep dealing with these crazy Israelites. We're just going to decide to basically what we today call ethnically cleanse, right? They got rid of most of the Israelites here. You guys ever heard of the 10 lost tribes of Israel? For those that have, this is why they're lost. Because the Assyrian empire took them from here and they brought them to another section of their empire. And then they took other people, 5 nations actually, the Bible tells us, right? And they bring them here, right? So there's somebody working the land, right, that you could collect taxes from. And then it wasn't just the Jews that did this, that they did this too. They did it to many people, right? That's how they maintain control over such a large empire, right? And so right now, this is when you have, right, 5 nations of people coming in, right? Now, not all the Israelites were cleansed, right? Some of them stayed. Some of them fled to Jerusalem. We'll talk about that later, right? But then they started mixing, right, with these people, right? These 5 nations and the Israelites, and they start mixing, right? By the time of Nehemiah and Ezra, about 200 years later, right, when they come to the Jerusalem temple, like, hey, we want to help build the temple, help build the walls. And Ezra says, no, go away. This is not for you to build our temple. It's for us. You have taken on way too many customs, right? You've married foreign wives, right? You've diluted, thank you very much. Let's keep walking. You've diluted, right, the Israelite, let's say, genetics, right? You are no longer a part of us. You are separate completely. And this is the beginnings of the Samaritans. These are the origins of the Samaritan people, right? That lived in what is today the northern West Bank, settled around the area, the city of Shomron or Samaria. Right now, they are, the difference between the Samaritans and the Jews is that two main things. One, they hold holy not Jerusalem, but Mount Gerizim, which is next to the Palestinian city of Nablus. It was the ancient biblical city of Shechem, or Shechem. Sometimes it's pronounced in English. All right? The other thing is their holy canon, their holy books, are the 5 books of Moses. That's it. There's no prophets, no judges, no book of kings, right? Nothing. It's just the 5 books of Moses, and that's the Samaritans. Now, when Jesus meets the Samaritan woman, right, he talks about how she's been married to 5 men. That could be a metaphor, because the 5 men represent the 5 nations that the Assyrians brought to the land that married with the Israelite remnants that established the Samaritan nation. Right? Now, there are about 1,000 Samaritans left in the land of Israel. You have half of them roughly next to in the town of Gerizim, their holy site, and then you have in the city of Cholon, just south of Tel Aviv. When the British took over in 1917, there was about 117 Samaritans left. Now today there's around 1,000, and one of the reasons why they've grown is because now we do genetic testing, right? In Israel, before you get married, brides, like husbands and brides and grooms, they get tested for genetic sort of deformalities, or that way, so they can know if you're marrying this person, you're increasing the chances, right, of a genetic mutation or a problem with your child, like T-Sax or something like this, God forbid, right? And so the Samaritans, right, they only intermarried, so they had a lot of infant mortality, right? They died just naturally hundreds of years ago. All children died very early, right, because medicine wasn't there. But even if they didn't have that problem, then they had the additional problem of genetic problems. Right? And in fact, you can identify Samaritan by their ears. I was during the reserve duty. I was stationed at their village, right? And anybody that comes into this village either need to have an Israeli ID, a foreign passport, right, or a member of the Samaritan community, right? So when like an Arab car would come up, right, with the Palestinian license plates, we would ask for the ID, and it would say like Samaritan, right? But usually you don't even need to ask for the ID. Just look at the ears, because their ears are really, really big. Right, like this, very, very huge. And so you can ID him. In fact, a friend of mine joked that when he asked for a Samaritan for his ID, he's like, "What? You can't see? Like you can't tell that I'm a Samaritan? Why are you bothering me asking me for my ID?" Right now, here we have an attempt by the Israelite kingdom to bring the water of the city into the city, because in case there is a siege, they can't get to it because it's outside the walls. Right, the main source of water for the Tell, right, is a natural spring that comes out of a cave, right? But it's outside the walls. Now, they don't want to, in time of siege, not have water. So what they did was they dug this huge pit, right? It goes down, right, allowing for access to the level of the water, right? And then a tunnel that goes straight to the cave, right? So the water would be brought in. And then in times of war, right, they could camouflage the entrance of the cave, of the natural cave that the Tell is built around, right, cover it up, and the enemy, who doesn't understand that things been camouflaged, has no access to water, but the people in the city, they can just walk down these stairs. We can see these are the original stairs, right, and have access to water. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to go down these steps. There's a sign here, so something like 183 steps down, and then on the way out, it's 81 steps on the way out. Okay, everybody can do this? Yes, great. All right. Let's head down.